For tonight, we're going to be talking about the dish. And let me get that screen up. Okay, so like I said, most of you had this project in your email last week. If you didn't, you'll get all the details, and I'll include it again in this week's email also for the actual project of the month that I do for Next Wave. And in it, we'll have a finalized set of plans, VCarve file for this dish, as well as the how-to for the steps we're going through for saving out the tool paths and cutting it. But between tonight and next week, we're going to go over the design process of this and then look at the tool paths as well. Now, last week we covered some another type of project on 3D modeling and carving as such, and this builds on some of that. It'll also introduce a couple new features tonight that we'll be looking at. So the basics of the dish we're dealing with is if we look down here, it's an 1.5 inch thick block of wood that we're cutting this out of. We're shooting for a 1/4 inch wall on the dish. This is the cross section of the finished dish. We're going to put a little pedestal on it. And then also we're adding a little bit of detail to give it a little bit of a round over on the top edge. Now, this is all done in VCarve, so some of these design elements, there's some limits in VCarve as to how far we can push some of these details. In Aspire, there's a lot, I mean, it's pretty much unlimited with how one could do this, and in some ways it's a little more straightforward. But what most people don't realize is that VCarve has an exceptional amount of 3D modeling, manipulation, and even editing and resizing power built right into it. But 3D modeling is kind of a whole skill unto itself. You know, there's these areas in VCarve and Vectric software that it's kind of like node editing. Node editing is kind of a whole skill unto itself, and it takes a while to get good at it. Well, 3D modeling is kind of the same way. So between last week and tonight and next week, hopefully you'll pick up some things. You'll be able to give it a try, even for some basic stuff. The other thing about tonight's project is that we have, it's a two-sided project. So first of all, I'm going to jump over here to the job setup, take a look at that. And the most basic aspect here is you're going to set up for a double-sided setup. We're going to do the Z-zeroing off the top of the material for both of these. The material that I used for this project that I recommend is a consistent 1.5 inch thick. So when your material is a consistent thickness, zeroing off the same surface or the top surface is a safe option. There are times you're dealing with material that might be, say, rough sawn or something like that, that then you may determine that you want to do this, which is to zero off of the same side, but you do it from the top at one time and you do it from the bed the second time. That way, everything, your tool paths are all referenced off of the same side. And that way, if you have a rough sawn piece of material, any variation, that material ends up going to that side too, and it helps it out that way. But for tonight's project, going off the top surface, which is a pretty common way to set it up, is what we'll do. Also, we're going to do the XY datum at the middle location. That just both makes setup easy as well as flipping easy. And for this flip, we're going to go a left to right as opposed to a vertical, and we'll set up our registration pins accordingly. So that's the basic setup. Like I said at the beginning, if we don't get into all the details of the two-sided tonight, we'll talk more about that tomorrow night. Plus the instructions that go with this project, if you follow and read through those, that gives you quite a bit of the routine or the process for doing two-sided also. So going through that for this project or a similar project, you can learn a lot about two-sided setup just from doing it. So with that said, we then look at, this is a picture of what the project will look like in the 3D once it's done. And there's some basic measurements that I entered here off of that. You can see where the spoil board registration holes are going, as well as some of the other details. So starting out for this, we're on the top side right now. And if you've not used two-sided setup before, you have a flip option up here where we can flip between the top and I click on that, and that flips to the bottom view where I have some additional information saved. So we're going to start out the top side, and then going over to Clipart. The Clipart we're going to use tonight under domes and dishes is this option right here, which is called the 60-degree dome or dish. The difference between these various dishes, if you kind of see it in the picture here, but that degree mark basically has to do with how steep the side angle is. So the 90-degree starts out pretty much, goes straight down like falling off of a cliff, where the 30-degree is a little bit more like going into the water from a beach. It's more gentle. And we're going to pick the 60, which has a nice angle to it, but a little bit of slope. So to insert this, all you have to do is double left click on it, and it inserts it over in the area. And so I like to work at 2 levels of editing this. I have my general idea of where I want to go from this picture right here, or on a napkin sketch or something. And now I want to edit this component, and I'm going to start out over here in the Components tab. There's my dome and dish, and I will double click on this to open that up. And we can see the default height is right there at the shape height of 1.38, 1 3/8 roughly. Well, let's just step down here a minute and look at this cross section. I don't have all the measurements spelled out here, but we can kind of extract from this that this inner dish, this wall is a 1/4 inch thick, and it looks like we're at about a 1/4 inch thick on the bottom. In fact, that is the plan. We're going to be a 1/4 inch thick on the bottom. So from this point to the top up here would be 1.25 inches. So in that sense, we'll make this shape height 1.25. And let's zoom out here a minute. Open that up again. And I'm going to split my image here so we look at our 3D. And there we can see our 3D. Now, what we didn't notice, I'll take that back to where it was to start with, 1.375. And you can see on the right side over there how that dome stretched up. So now by changing that to 1.25, it brings it down to the height that we want. Now, this is the inside of the dish, and we have a dome, but we want a concave surface instead. So we are currently set by default on merge. By doing a subtract, it will automatically drop it into our project. Talked a little bit about this last time, but the little transparent plane that you see here is called the modeling plane. And when you build your projects, everything is built relative or in reference to that modeling plane. So our dome dish is 1.25 inches in height, the component, but because we did a subtract, it put it to the bottom or the negative side of that modeling plane. And this is just how the system works. You kind of have to get your head around how it thinks, and you got to learn to work with it. And then along the way, there's always a few surprises. You have to come back sometimes and rework stuff because of the way stuff combines. So we have that part set up. The last part I want to do on the configuration on this is the diameter of this, enlarge this. The diameter of this dish shape is this 6 inches. It just comes to the inside of that rim. This thickness of the other part is actually part of our bottom and our rim. But the dish shape we want is this 6-inch diameter. So then I'll go into the design tab, open up the object size window, and I'm going to make sure to uncheck the auto Z because I've already set that height to 1.25 inches, which is what I want. So I'm going to leave that alone, and I'm going to leave the linked on the XY, and I will increase this to 6 inches, and you'll notice on the 3D image there, the grayscale, it'll increase. There, it popped up to the right size. So we now have, again, if we look at the 3D, we now have that part all set up, the basics of it. So next, we'll flip over to the back side, to the bottom side, and we're essentially going to do the same thing. We're going to go into the clip art, grab that 60-degree dome dish, double click on it, and go back into components. Open that up. Now, in this case, if we were to go back and look at the cross section, this component on the bottom actually is going to be the full 1.5 inch height to start with. So we'll take and enter that in. Let's split that view again. You can watch this, watch what's happening over here in the 3D view. It looks pretty strange right now. But that dome in the middle is in fact our dish that we're dealing with. Change that to 1.5 and notice what happens. Nothing. Let's see what's going on here. Okay, we'll do that. So actually that's the right height. Now we need to go into the design area and we need to change the diameter. So I'm going to select that. And again, leave the auto scale Z off. And in this case now, again, we want this to be 6.5 because we want about a 1/4 inch rim all the way around. 6.5 and apply. And bingo, we now have a basic bowl shape. Let's close out of that and rotate that. And there you can see we have our basic bowl shape. And that's kind of the magic to have these two things add and subtract from each other. Now let's go back and look at our component here a second. This component is currently set to merge. It could be set to add, and we really end up with the same results because the way those two are working together, it doesn't matter. And like we looked at last time, this first model that you enter, if it's going to be at the bottom of your layer cake, as I referred to this, merge or add is the typical way of setting it up, and it usually doesn't matter which it is. Once we start adding components, we may find that we have to change it, but generally you don't have to. So doing an add on this one is the correct way to have that set up for now. And then on this one, of course, we want this dome to be subtract. Now, along the way, just to kind of verify things or to see what's happening, you can turn these components off and on. So I turn that off. There I have just my bottom component. It's just a block of wood with the dome shape going down for the bottom. As soon as I add my dish for the top, it subtracts from it. So one of the handy tools as you're working with, especially objects like this, is you can pull a cross section off of this quite easily using this tool at the bottom left over here called the cross-section vector tool. And I simply go to the middle right here, click, left click, go over here and click, and there's the cross-section of our top side. The bottom side, I started the opposite side because I want it to extend to the bottom. So I click over here and then click to the left. And there's the bottom side of it. Now, we're going to take that vector and I will move that to the other side and then flip back over. And there we can see our lines, how they're working out. Now, I'm going to verify a couple things here. Let's take and move these vectors first off. I'm going to select those and just kind of move those down. Okay, so I've got this block of wood set up down here. Now, something isn't quite adding up like I thought it should. So this is kind of a good check. Also could go over to my toolpath window, open up material setup. And inside here, I can see that my total height for my model thickness is about 1 3/8 inches. I was really expecting that to be a full 1.5 inches, but I've got some remnant left here, and that's why we have that little bit at the bottom. It's not allowance for my pedestal. This really should be coming all the way to the bottom. So when you or start working with models like this and start working with the designs again. Once again, if you don't see what you want, pause for a minute, go back and investigate. I also have, as you notice, I don't have a consistent wall thickness. So let's go back and look at some things. I'm going to go back and let's look at our dish on the top side. In fact, I'm going to rename this for convenience, call this top dish. Well, that looks correct. That should be 1.25 inches down. That looks correct. Let me double check this rectangle here to make sure it's the right height. So that's 1.5 inches tall. That's the right height. We'll go back to the back side. And let's see what this is. And here's our air. For some reason, it defaulted back to its original height. So I will change this back to 1.5 inches. Close out of that. Go over and check our material setup. And now notice our material setup says our model thickness is 1.5 inches. So that's correct as well. We could also then go in and pull another cross section on this to double check. Pull that across for the bottom. Select that vector, move it to the other side. Okay, so now I want to flip back. Notice how my flip button is grayed out. When you lose access to a particular tool, it's usually the result of some other window being open. Now, I don't see any windows open here, but I have a suspicion that I left open my material setup, and sure enough. So when that is open, you're not able to flip sides. So I need to close that first. Now I can flip back to the top. Okay, let's go in here and pull a cross section. Click, click, and there we have really what we're looking for. So let's take that and move that. Oops, not the whole thing. Just those vectors. Move that down to that one for now, and we'll just delete that. So now you can see we have a consistent dish cross section for both parts. So next, I'm going to go back and add this pedestal to the bottom. So just to kind of make this a little easier to follow, I'm going to turn off that component on the top dish, go to the bottom side, and I'm actually going to turn off that component as well. So we've turned off those two components. When you get a hang of this, you don't have to do that, but for right now, I think it'll add help a little clarity on how this is going together. Now I'll go back into my clip art. I'm going to pull up this square called a flat square, click on that, and there you can see on the right side, it's got a nice little radius on the edge. We'll go back to our components. But now if I turn my dome on the bottom again, notice how obviously it's the wrong size. It's not coming up to the bottom. So those are some of the changes we have to make to it. So for this particular one, it's set up to be 2.5 inches across. I'm actually going to go into my design. And in this case, I'm going to change the size of it first. Not a requirement to do this first, but I think it'll just kind of demonstrate the process a little better. So there, I've done that. Now notice again, we looked at this last week. I can see the kind of the shadow of it here, but I can't actually see the object. And the reason for that, again, if we go in and turn off the dome on the bottom, is that our base is just sitting down there inside. So we need to add some height to that, or we need to add it to the base. Now, if I go in and change the combine mode to add, that puts it on the bottom, but notice it's curved. And we certainly don't want it to be curved. It needs to be flat because it conforms to whatever shape it's being added to. One of the things that's important to understand about the add mode think of whatever part you're putting the add mode to, in this case, is square shape. It turns that shape basically into a blanket of its original thickness. It just lays it over whatever object you're laying it on. That's what add does. We want this to be merge, and so I will change this back to merge, but then again, when we change it back to merge, it drops down to its original height. So for that, we need to do two things. One is we need to add basically what we call a base height. And a base height, we talked about last week, is kind of like a foundation. We also need to think about what height we want the shape height to be. Now, 1/4 inch, that actually works out just fine. That's the height of our shape. And so we can stick with that for now. And then adding to that the difference because of the thickness of our block, our base height would be 1.25, and it pops right up through like that. Now you can see the difference between the base height is this straight edge, and the shape height is the red area right there. Now, if we decided that this rounded edge was too much and we wanted a little less of a radius, we could change the base height to 1/8 of an inch, or rather the shape height. And notice how it makes that radius much tighter, which might be nice, but it also has changed the overall height because we cut off 1/8 of an inch. So we need to add that back in to the base height so the math works out, and that brings it back up. So now we have a little bit more of a refinement to that shape. I like that, so I'm going to keep that as is, and that's the base part of it. Now let's close out of that, and let's flip back over to the other side, and there you can see it. Let's turn this model back on, and it's looking pretty good. So let's go ahead just for take another cross section of this and see how the cross section is shaping up. So again, on the front side, I will start at the left and go to the right, and then flip over to the back. And at the back side, I'm going to start at the right, because remember, this thing is flipping left to right, so it's really the opposite side. If I start out on this left side, I'll just do this and go like that. Notice how it puts the cross section to the top side, which is not what I want. So I want the cross section to the bottom. It just makes it easier when I move it to the other side. Take that, delete that, select that, and do a move to other side. Now we'll flip back over. And so now the dish is shaping up. Get that going on. So if we move that down, we have a nice shape as well with the little base on it. Everything's looking pretty good. So let me move these down a little bit and copy this one and drag it back up, because we'll add another cross section after we do our next step. Now the next thing, as you can see, if we take and turn off the plane, we've got a very flat edge on this, very flat top. And I've cut molds like this using VCarve for some classes that I teach, and it works out fine. People go back and they hand sand or power sand this and get a nice little rounded edge, and it works out well. But I wanted to show people how in VCarve you actually can add a little bit of curve to that. The finished cross section should or will look like what you see right here. It's not a perfect round, but that's one of the limitations with VCarve. If I was doing this in Aspire, I would have capabilities to produce a little bit nicer lip on it than what we have here. But for VCarve, it works out fine, and the finished project, as you can see up here, will have a nice little curved lip on it, and it works out pretty well. Okay, to add that, we're going to be working on the top side again, and we need to find another component, or rather clip art, and we have one right here. It's just like the square base we added, but this is a round one. So I'm going to double click on that, and there you can see it's just like the square one, but it's rounded, and we need to size this accordingly. So again, first thing I'm going to do is there's my round shape. I'm going to go in and open it up and change that height to 1/8 of an inch because I want that lip just to be 1/8 of an inch tall, kind of like we did on the base. Gives us a little lower profile on that. And then I need to go into the design tab back up here where we are with the, let's see here, with the set size. And then for this one, we want that diameter to be equal to the base. So that would be 6.5. We'll type in 6.5 and apply. And there you can see now we've stretched that all the way out. But it's not working as far as going through it's basically just laying on top. So let's see what's going on there. If we go to the component tree over here and we see that the flat round is set to merge. Now here's something that's interesting. Remember how the base, when we added that, it disappeared. That's because everything, remember, is referencing this modeling plane. So because we have a merge with this flat round circle, it is first of all going on top of that modeling plane because we're on the top side. And then it's adding to that, even though it's at a merge style. Now, if I change that to flat, or rather to add, remember how I mentioned how when you do the add mode, it basically takes your shape and turns it into a blanket and lays it over the other object. We'll do that as an add, and there you can see now it laid it over the object, and we have this little rib. That's a little curve. It's got a little sharp edge on the inside, and again, there may be some ways in VCarve to deal with it, but for this project, we're going to stop right here and accept that. When I made the actual one, I just went back and did a nice little hand sanding on that edge, and it worked out well. So that's the lip. But one more check is, let's go back now that we've basically got, we still have to add the hearts to this, but we have the basic model done. So let's go back and do a reality check here on the material setup. And we have an error message. So what it's telling us is that the thickness of our model, all these components together, is coming out to almost 1 5/8, obviously thicker than our actual material. Now, there's a couple of ways to deal with this. In some setups, if you have a complex setting of lots of different shapes, especially if you're doing like landscape or animals or shapes like that, it's sometimes the easiest thing to do is just hit this set button and go in and do a new height, and it'll scale both sides. And if I put 1.5 in there, it will just kind of compress everything. But in doing that, it's going to change some details that I don't want to change. I don't want to change the thickness of this bowl. I don't want to change the thickness of the base. I don't want to change the thickness of that rim I just added. So instead, I need to go in and find a different solution to this, which, if we think practically, what we did was we added an 1/8 inch to the top. So once again, let's pull another cross section on this. See what this is looking like. So there we can see there's the little rib we added. Let's go back to the back side, add that cross section. And then let's take and move that to the other side. And let's take these two and move these down. Now we can immediately see that we have a couple things going on here. One is we're now taller. And of course, we knew that when we looked at the material setup. We're taller. That's because we added that 1/8 of an inch height to that. Up to this point, the modeling plane really is the top of our material in these two bottom setups, but now we added something on top of that modeling plane and we're thicker. The thickness of our dish also increased. It's like, well, why did that happen? Well, remember how I mentioned that when you add something like this round platter shape, it acts like a blanket. So we essentially added 1/8 of an inch to the entire inside of this So how do we deal with that? Well, there's a couple things ways we could deal with this. One is you might think that the thing to do would be to make this dish deeper, which sounds about right. But let's go ahead and do that and see what happens. I'm going to go into my components and my top dish. If I wanted that dish to go down further, I could increase that to say from that inch, let's increase it by that 1/8 of an inch. Okay. And we can't really see too much change over here, but where we're going to find a change, keep moving these down. Oops, let's do this. Go back and pull the cross section again. Flip it over. Move it back. And we did solve one problem. We have a thinner side, and that looks good, but we still are too thick. And so it's kind of a dilemma when you're thinking, well, how do I get that below that surface? What we actually have to do is we actually have to take the bottom and we actually have to lower the height of the bottom. If I dare, let's see if I could do it kind of like that by the 1/8 of an inch. And then this whole top surface will drop down to that. So let me demonstrate that. And I know this gets a little deep into the weeds with what we're doing here, but this is a realistic situation when you're setting up a two-sided 3D model. You have these issues to deal with. So let me make another copy of this. Move that down. Okay, so the strategy now is going to be is we're going to go back in to the bottom side, open up the component window. We're going to take this dish or the dome shape, and we're going to decrease that by an 1/8 of an inch. So notice on the left now, the pedestal is sticking up pretty high still, and we actually still need to go back and change that as well. So we're going to change this by an 1/8 of an inch on the base height. So this looks the bottom side once again based on the proportions. And then we'll go ahead and pull a cross section off of this again to verify that it's set up correct. Move that. Go to the top side and cross section the top side. And of course, we can already see there's something going on here, but let's move this one down now. So now we've solved one problem. We've got the height correct. So that's good, but this height here doesn't seem, it's not consistent. It's not the way I want it. So that adjustment that we made to the inside of the bowl is something that, well, we probably should have done it. So then we'll go back into that component on the top side dish, and we will take out that 1/8 of an inch that we added. Remember, this is 1 3/8 inches going from the top down to the inside of that dish. We want to raise that inside of the dish back up. So rather than making it 1 3/8 inches deep, we'll make it back to the 1 1/4 deep. And close that. One more copy of this. And we'll pull the cross section again. And to the bottom side. Move it. And then select those two, and let's pull those down. And there we have the fix. So now we're within, the height is correct, our wall thickness looks good, and the bottom right there. So those proportions now work out. So I show you all that because as you make changes to one side or the other, or one component or the other, it can have very significant effects on the others. And that's why starting out with a pretty good, you want to start with a clear idea of what you're after. And so I actually had a pencil sketch. My concept originally was I wanted a little bit of a rounded edge on it. I wanted this base, but I wanted a nice consistent 1/4 inch thickness on the wall, and it needed to stay within that 1.5 inch material. Next, we want to, of course, add the hearts to this. And I've got a few details here that I'm working with. So let me open this one up all the way. There's one other thing I want to point out here is that notice how when we're looking at this bowl right now, I'll split it again. I don't really see it. All I see here is kind of a flat white surface. I don't really see it inside of the bowl. Well, I mentioned this last time, I think, but I'll show you again. If I go to components, and that's my flat round, and that's laying on top. And in this 2D view, the order of these, it's kind of like layers. But if I right click on this one, and I've got a 2D preview, it gives me the chance to move it to the front or to the back. You really have those two options. So if you have a lot of components, you have to kind of do it strategically in order. So the last one you want on top appears there. In this case, I'm going to send that flat round from a 2D preview standpoint. I'm going to move it to the back. That doesn't have any effect on its actual structure of where it's going to appear in the model. It's strictly an illustration thing in the 2D preview. But when I do this, and that one didn't have much of an effect. Let's try the dish. Oh, let's wait, see, that's what I'm looking for. That's the image I'm looking for. There we go. It cleared itself up. So now when we look at this 2D image, we actually see the rim along the edge, and we see dark in the middle because it's going down deeper. So it's a little bit, it's truer to what the 2D view should look like. We may run into that again when we deal with the hearts. So next with the hearts, I'm going to go into the Clipart. I believe they are inside decorative or objects rather. Let's scroll down here. There they are. So I'll double click on those. There we go. So that's how they come in, that size. So we need to make some adjustments to that. So in this case, I'm going to go in and I have predetermined that I want those 1 inch wide. So I'm going to select that, go into the settings here. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and auto Z. I'm not sure that it'll give me the exact height that I want, but in this case anyway, I want to just kind of scale it down proportionate, both in the X, the Y, and the Z. So I'm going to make that 1 inch wide and apply. And it may have auto Z'd it, but it still is really tall. So we need to deal with that. So I will then go into my component window and open up my heart right here. And so, something else is happening here. Okay, so this shape height is really only about what is that, 1/16 of an inch thick, but it looks a lot thicker here. The reason for that is because the shape is laying on top of the modeling plane, but from a visualization standpoint, it is giving us material all the way down to the bottom of the dish, even though it really doesn't have a base height. So again, it's kind of an optical illusion the way it sets itself up there. So you just have to be aware that what do I trust? Do I trust the view over here, or do I trust the measurements? In this case, you need to go with the measurements over here and recognize that it's the combined mode that's making the difference. Now, if we look at this 3D picture here, you can see how that heart is actually laying on the inside. So unlike either our round piece we added or the square part of the bottom we added, we don't want these hearts to merge, and it's currently set at merge. We want these to be additive because we want it to add to that surface. So I'm going to click on the add component, and you'll notice that on the right side, it immediately puts it to add. Turn off so there we go. So now we can take that and we can take that heart and we can move that heart up on the edge up here. And let's just double check that that's centered like that. I think that looks good. Okay. Now we're going to be using the 3D over here because we want to make sure you don't want, depending on your design, if you get this too far towards the top, it'll start to wrap over like that. So you have to watch for that. So we're going to just bring it down a little bit. And it's mostly a visual thing, just kind of like aesthetically, what do you want to see over here? So we may play with this, but right now that looks pretty good. Looks actually pretty close to what I originally had. I have a measurement there. I could pull that measurement, but I'm not going to do that at this point. Now that heart, I need to rotate that all the way around. And because I set up the data point in the middle, this actually makes rotation quite easy. So I'm going to select it, use the circular copy array function. And this shows me my object size. It's 1 inch in the X and approximately 1 inch in the height. Now you can't actually edit these. That's why they're grayed out. That's just giving you the size of the shape you've selected. Now the rotational center by default ends up being the middle of your object usually, but we want it to be the middle of our setup. So we know that XY datum is 0, 0. So I'm going to change this to 0, hit the tab key. Notice how I have a double circle there now. That represents my rotational center. And I do want 10 of these, and I want to do it at a full 360. I want the objects to rotate. That way, kind of like a clock, they'll rotate with the curve. And I'm going to go ahead and group those. So I'll click on copy. And it puts them all the way around. Now, let me undo that for a second. Hit the Control Z. Select it again. Remember earlier how that rotation location was something like 2.5? If you forget to do that and you do the rotation, notice what you'll get. It'll pretty much rotate right on itself like that. And that's because the rotation, the center of rotation is set up incorrectly. So we'll select it again. And now sometimes this double circle, this circle right here actually appearing. It doesn't always appear the first time you bring an object up. Once you change the center up here, it does automatically. But you can also manually grab that and bring it down to the center like that. And notice how we actually have the correct center. It just snaps right there to the middle. But once again, we're going to go ahead and copy those. We're all set up for these. Now, there's one other thing that I did. May not be visible on this one. Let's look over here. Yeah, these look pretty good, but I'm going to show you one other little trick that in a situation like this, you want to use another tool. I'm going to undo that. Let's say that I wanted this heart shape, the bottoms of it to kind of fade, not to be so prominent and not to be so sharp right there. Not that it really matters much, but I'm just from a design standpoint, I just want to kind of fade that in. So here's how you could do that. Oh, and here's a good example. We just lost the heart over here. Oh, there it is. Okay. So I would go into the component window and I have a fade and a tilt. Now, what a fade does is a fade starts at the high corner and basically melts the bottom edge and fades it down to nothing. A tilt starts at the low edge and lifts it up. So it actually adds height to it on the high edge. So that's the difference between fade and tilt, kind of like you see here. We want this to be a fade. And then I'm going to click set. And I need to get this oriented over here. And then my anchor point is the part that I want to remain fixed. And then I stretch that out to the part that I want to remain faded. So I'm going to click on the top edge because I want that to remain fixed, and then select down here and click there. And what that does, if we exaggerate this, I'm going to take this and put this up to 100% fade, and the tips of that heart should pretty much disappear. Yeah, so you see that, yeah, they're blended, they're fading away pretty much entirely right there. Now, that's probably more than what we want, so I could go back in here and let's just do a 50% fade on that, just to thin that bottom edge out just a little bit. Now, for some reason you wanted the top edge to be a little thicker, you could add some height to this shape, or you could do a tilt. Probably in this case, the easiest thing to do would be to go in and add a little height to it. In fact, we're at 1/16 of an inch. I want that to be 1/8 of an inch tall on the high side. 0.125 tab. And there. So we've added a nice little bit of thickness to the top edge. Now let's go back in our fade. We may decide that we want to fade it more now because we've added some thickness. Let's add a little more fade to that. There, we'll just accept that. That looks good. Having done that, and now that you've modified that, it's much easier to do it on a single object than to do it on all of them separately. We could go back into our array circle, and we can copy that across. And close out of that. And we pretty much have this all complete at this point. Now our components, we have all of our different components on the two sides like that. Okay, so now that we have all of our components set up, we can just kind of take a final look at this. You know, we don't need to re-verify the profile down here because we already did that. We know that was good. Our hearts look good. It looks good in the 3D over here. When we go again, looking at our component tree, we have lots of components. Now, if there was something you thought you might want to do with this component tree or this design later on, you could just stop here, toolpath it, and everything's good. There is one more thing. Well, actually, let me do this first. One thing I might do at this stage is I actually could take all of these components like that and right-click and group them into one big group, and then I can actually take and right-click and hit bake. When you bake it, it's like baking bread. It cooks it into one object, and there's no getting the parts apart again. So you want to be careful about this, but there is some advantages to it, is that now I only have one component to deal with on this side. And you don't have to do this, but if you're doing complicated design, sometimes baking that design into one is a good way to go about it. I will sometimes make a copy of that big group and then bake the copy so I still have my original. It really just depends on what you're trying to get accomplished with the design. Now, this is also a good time to stop and look over here. It's like, whoa, what's going on over here? And this, you're going to find some odd remnants will occasionally pop up. They generally don't cause problems with toolpathing, but I like to try and get rid of them. We could actually look here. It looks like we have a little hole. And that's basically what these are. There's little holes in our design. So like, what's causing that? Well, it's a little glitch inside the program. I've been experiencing it for the last few months. And generally, if I turn off my model and turn it back on, there, it usually fixes it.
Went away.
It's really just a illustration problem. There have been times in the past, and there can be times in some of your designs where it really does represent a mechanical flaw in your design. And if you went to toolpath, it would actually cause problems because the toolpathing would treat it as a real model. But in this case, it appears just to be an oddity with the display. Maybe it's just my computer, maybe it's something in VCarve. Let's flip over to the back side. Again, we can do the same thing here. I can select that by clicking on it, and then I can group it and then bake it. And now we have one shape. Let's flip back over, see if everything looks good there. Everything looks good there. Okay, so now that we've got that much accomplished, we need to add some tabs. We can see the tabs right there. But let's take and turn the modeling plate on. Notice how the modeling plate still maintains its location. Okay, this will come into play here in a little bit. So let's go to the bottom side because that's where we want to add the tabs. You can see here how the tabs are added right there. And I'm going to go in, and these are called 3D tabs. They're in the Clipart up at the top, 3D tabs. And let's grab this one, or let's grab this 1/2 inch one right here. I'll double click, and it lays it in there, right there. I can then take and zoom into this drawing, grab it, drag it up here. Then I'm going to hit the 9 key or the 0 key on my keyboard just to rotate it once and just position it like that. Now let's get this aligned correctly. And because this is set on merge, it's just blending right in, and that's exactly how we want it. Now this came out, it says a 1/2 inch. We can verify that. Let's go into components first off, and let's double click. And we want the shape height. So here we are. We're at, again, notice how it's adding to the bottom of the modeling plate, and that's correct. When we do the carving on the top, our tool bit, the way I had it set up and the way I found worked well, the tool bit tends to pass over this edge a little bit and does clip this a little bit, cuts into it a little bit, which is fine. But on the bottom side, we want this tab to be a little bit thicker. So I'm going to actually make it 1/4 of an inch thick. And that'll be a nice, generous tab to make sure it holds it in place. Now, if I were to take this tab and rotate it back horizontal, it's selected, and I actually could look, let's see, if I look down at the lower right corner of my design, I can see down to this lower right, you'll notice when I select it, it has an H there, and a W is a 1, and an H is a 0.5. So I'm 0.5 height to that and 1 inch long. So that looks good in the overall dimensions. So I'll re-rotate that. And then it's a real simple thing to post that all the way around. Now you could actually position these very precisely. We don't really need to, but you can, just like with vectors, if I select that and I do a move object setting, and I want an absolute location and the center of it, that gives me an XY location that looks like that. So let's say let's make that, see how this looks, 1.25 or 2.25, and let's make this one at 375 and see how this looks. That looks reasonable. And just to show you that you can actually use your move tool to position 3D models precisely. Now that I have that, the way that I find to rotate this, I could use the circular array. That's one option. I could even use that array, but I like just to use the mirror image tool and flip about the job center, click vertical, it flips it to the bottom, then do horizontal, flips it to the other side, and vertical again, and it flips it to the top side. And close out of that. So there we have our 4 tabs now added to that. And our model is essentially done. I could also bake those tabs into my model if I wanted to, but I probably won't in this case. But if you were, doing this for someone and it was a complicated design, or you were helping someone and they said, I just want to get this design in a situation where I don't mess with it. So you don't want them to, disturb the original design. Then baking everything is a good way to go, because you cannot break these components back apart. So this has one fixed accommodation right now. Now, I could take this bowl and I could scale it up and down. So, I could double this bowl in width and height. I could do the height separately from the X and Y. So let's just play with this a little bit here with the little bit of time we have left. If I wanted this to be an oval bowl, now the hearts are going to get weird, so you just have to understand that. But if I didn't have the hearts to deal with, if I didn't have those in my design, you could do some interesting things with this. So let's take the bottom shape, go into the size, and let's unlink that, and let's turn off the auto Z, and let's change the heights to 4 and apply. And things obviously get really weird in the 3D right now. But let's go back to the top, select that one, and let's change that height to 4. And except for the oddity of the tabs, we now have an interesting little oval bowl. So again, the hearts have got a little bit odd. If I'd not baked those hearts into that design, I could have turned those hearts off, and I could have set up an oval in here, and I could have spun those around that oval, and I would have had a similar design. So what's interesting about this is, even though we start out with that round, I now have an oval shape. And you can take that shape, and because everything here is done inside of VCarve, you can make multiples of the same one. So let's do this. Let's see how weird we can get here. I'm going to copy that, paste it. So there I have 2 copies of it. I'm going to take this copy and rotate it like that. And let's go to the bottom, and let's turn that off for right now. Go back to the top and see if we can make sense out of that. So kind of odd. If we were to put this top one on merge, put this bottom one on merge, I don't think that'll make a difference. But now we have an interesting shape also. And again, aside from the hearts being odd, but we've got a pretty complex, shape going on. Let's go to the bottom for a minute, turn off our tabs, turn the bottom dome on. Let's copy that and paste it. Control C, Control V for paste. See if it'll do it. A little slow. Let's try it again. Let's duplicate. There we go. Let's select that one and rotate that 90. And let's do the same trick here. Let's do merge. And so there we've got an interesting bottom to this bowl. We've got an interesting top. So it's pretty amazing how much you could do within VCarve when you start playing around. You can create some pretty unusual shapes just using the native components that comes with the project or with the program. Now we've got a little bit of remnant going on in here. That's not uncommon because we've got a little bit of offset apparently, and there's some ways to deal with that. Again, sometimes the tool pathing will ignore it. Sometimes it won't. Sometimes just by changing the size of one of the components a little bit, it looks like that object's the offending one. So let's see which one that is. So that's this one. If I take that one and see if I enlarge that by the smallest amount, let's increase that a very tiny amount. And there you can see it's starting to disappear on the left, right over there. Let's go a little bit more. Apply. There, I got rid of those extra hairs. That's because this top edge was protruding past the bottom. And when you have shapes that are so closely sized like this and aligned, you sometimes get that. But yeah, now we've got it. Certainly on this bottom side, it's an interesting shape. And then on the top side, it's a little bit odder. But you, again, can see how you can start working with models. And VCarve is surprisingly powerful when it comes to combining and editing things like this.
Hey, Randy, if
Yes.
that weren't baked, could you take those other, let's call it the square walls out of there and make the top look like the inverse of the bottom?
Could I take this shape here and make that on the top side also?
No, just go to the top side.
Yep.
Get rid of the walls.
Get rid of the walls.
Get rid of
The
these.
inner walls. Get rid
Yeah.
of the inner walls.
Right. Right. Yes, there is a way to do that. Let me see if I could bake these. It might be a little, so there is a combine mode. I'm sure I could do it on one half. Let's try this. There is a combine mode. If I open this up, it's an advanced combine mode over here, which is called merge to the lowest point. I click on that. Okay, wait a second. That was the wrong one. Let's do this. I'm on the bottom side. I gotta go to the top side. There we go. Let's go back. Wow, things are really getting weird. Let's see here. Let's go back to that. I think this one was supposed to be on merge. There we go. Okay, that looks good. The yellow bar over here, I didn't pay attention to that. I was on the bottom. We need to go back to the top. Okay, now we're on the top. Now I'm going to take this shape and set it to merge to lowest point. And there you go.
Cool.
Now we've got a little bit of weirdness going on over here, right here. But overall, yeah, that just took both those and merged it to the lowest point. So you eliminated that inner shape. Now, this rim that we have here, what's going on here, again, there are probably some ways to patch that up or add that, change that. But yeah.
Called sandpaper.
What's that?
Called sandpaper.
Yeah, sandpaper, exactly. Yeah, just call it a deliberate detail. So,
Randy, I have a real quick toolpath question for you.
okay.
And this would be a good example. If you did the finish carve with a 1/4 inch ball nose, and you didn't like the edges around the hearts, and you went ahead and reprogrammed it with a 1/16 inch ball nose, will it recarve the whole thing or just go back and do the trim around the hearts?
If you set it up correctly, it will only do around the hearts.
Just
And we're
do
actually
the-
going to take a look at that next week.
Okay.
Yep.
I got working on a project I'm going to cut tomorrow. So,
Yep. We'll take a look at that next week.
okay.
So anybody else before we close out tonight? Okay, everybody. Well, thanks for hanging out tonight, and we'll catch you next week.
Thanks for your help.
Randy.
All right. Thank you, Randy.
Good night.
Thanks, Randy.
Yep. Good night.
Thanks, Randy.
Thanks,
Bye.
Randy.